So the longer that I have been in academia, the less sort of passivist I've become and the less submissive I become. I'm generally this kind of person that, um, I'm a very much a passive sort of submissive person. If you were to know me and if you knew me growing up, and I was always like, everybody else knows better than I am, that I do, and the way that I sort of communicate, you will even hear it in the tone of my voice often. In my tone of my voice, some people think of it as sort of submissive. Um, what I realized is that you can't be like that in academia, and I'm becoming more like like screw you to the rest of the world because I actually know better. And I know that sounds like very pretentious, but I've become more not necessarily assertive, but if you don't sort of say this is the way it is, um, honestly, you kind of get pushed around a lot within the academic game, and I think that has been a huge part of my problem in terms of how I communicate, particularly when I write, is I used to think like other people were correct, right? But that's not how I think about things anymore, right? Like I used to think like, hey, if they rejected it or they rejected my ideas, it's because they were correct. Or I didn't write things properly enough. But I honestly think that's not the case. I think it's often the case where you're just not, and the way that I would word things and talk about things would be very, very submissive. Um, Particularly in terms of when I'm responding to other people, and I don't do that anymore. I kind of do a lot more of just definitive of like this is the way it is, this is what I did, and that is fine. This is how things actually work. Um, and I'm just getting less like honestly, I just don't really care. And I've become, more of like, and frankly, I kind of know. Um, Often I do know when you're studying something and you do it, you know everything about it, and you are the leading expert in that particular area. And I just say this is the way I did it, and that is fine. And I think a lot of that had to do with me processing why I was what and even today it's a work in progress and not something that I'm like okay this disappears. It's deeply ingrained in my traits, and it's me working with dealing with authority, particularly male authority, um, because that is such a big part of science. And I'm going to be honest about it. It's something that I struggled with my whole life in terms of dealing with male authority because of how I dealt with my dad, with my own father. In that I was, ultimately I was kind of scared of him in terms of how he'd react and how I'd behave. And so I have this very much this deep rooted weird connection in how I process things. And I become more like, no, this is actually the way it is. And, you know, if you don't like it, so what? Right? Like, and it's not my problem ultimately. And it's the way that I've sort of dealt with teaching and things like that. Now because I do know better. And I do know, and you do see, how things actually do work, right? Like I have read all of these things. I have a considerable amount of wisdom, and I have applied a lot of these things to my own life. And frankly, we're doing okay, right? Like I know that the results actually work, and so I've become more stable with who I am. I know my identity a lot more. And this has been a long process of just telling the world, like, screw you, and being okay with that. If they reject me for who I am, then fuck them. I know that is a bad word to say, and I don't want to say it too often, but I tend to say it a lot more now because, um, I'm okay with who I am. And, if it means that I'm going to get kicked out of the profession, if it means that, I'm not going to get a grant, or, I'm not going to get this paper published, or, they just sort of reject it based on whatever, right? Like, I know the problem is actually on them. And, the more that I've worked on things, the more that I just simply state this is the way it is. Um, so I still have troubles with communicating in a non-passive way, in a non-submissive way. It's still something I work with, and so I have to buck back against it. I either sort of gravitate towards this is too grumpy, and this is too submissive. And generally, 80% of the time, I'm too submissive. And so I'm being more factual of like, this is the way it is. This is how things work out. If you don't like it, then fine. You go find something else. Because I know that the majority of the process has nothing to do with how you communicate things. It had very little to do, like in communicating in the sense of the facts, or little to do with what you actually did. It has more to do with who you actually are. I'm 100% convinced of that. Who you work with, who you actually are. Um, Also has more to do with the sort of sociology, the political science of science, as well as, investing, the sort of just general world stuff, right? And you know, if you say something and you back it all up, um, you know, the facts should speak for the case for itself, but it doesn't, right? And so you have to communicate those facts in a way that you're just, frankly, this is the facts. Um, and I'm okay with saying that now. I'm okay with, and I think it's more of, the assertiveness. I remember my sister saying this a long time ago when I was a teenager. You just have to be more assertive. Um, and that's the truth. You just have to be more assertive, and this is the way that the facts are. And if you don't like it, then so be it, right? Like, that's ultimately the case. If you don't like how things turn out, is ultimately the problem is often on the other people now. I used to assume all of this, that the problem was me, and internalize it, but I don't anymore, because I know I'm actually correct. I'm doing the right things. I'm doing the sort of process and how things work, and I'm just more factual with it. And I just say, hey, this is the way it is. Screw it. And ultimately, I think a lot of the problems in terms of communication has to do with this sort of, being on one side too aggressive, right, and being sort of emotional about things, and on the other side being too passive and sort of being, like, just letting other people sort of take advantage. And ultimately, you just got to state the facts. You got to just say, this is the way it is. So be it. If you don't like it, tough luck. All right. Take care and have a wonderful day.